$10. That's all she had left in this world. Not 10,000. Not 1,000. $10. Most people wouldn't even think twice about spending that. A cheap meal. A bus ticket to nowhere. But this girl. This 22-year-old girl with nothing to her name and nowhere to sleep tonight. She did something with that $10 that nobody could explain. She bought a building. An old abandoned Coastguard station sitting on a cliff above the ocean. The kind of place that looks like it belongs in a horror movie. The windows were smashed. The walls were black with mold. The roof had caved in on one side. Salt and wind had been eating it alive for decades. Nobody wanted it. Nobody had stepped inside in years. The town had given up on it. But she didn't. She walked in with her $10 and claimed it as hers. People thought she had lost her mind. And maybe she had. But here is where this story takes a turn that nobody expected. Deep inside that station there was a room. A room at the very back. The signal room. The door was made of heavy metal. Rusted shut. Sealed tight. Like something inside didn't want to be found. She couldn't open it. Not the first day. Not the first week. Not even the first month. But she never stopped trying. And when she finally broke through that door months later and stepped inside, what she found in that room brought her to her knees. This is not just a story about a girl who fixed an old building. This is a story about a message that waited 80 years to be found by the exact right person. She never had a chance from the start. Born to parents she would never meet. Handed over to the system before she could even walk. Foster care became her entire world. But it was never a home. It was a rotation. A cycle of strangers. She moved from house to house. Family to family. School to school. By the time she was 15 she had lived in 11 different homes. 11. Some were okay. Most were not. In some she was ignored. In others she wished she had been. She learned early that nobody was coming to save her. Nobody was going to tuck her in at night and tell her things would be okay. So she stopped expecting it. She built walls around herself thicker than the ones in that Coastguard station. And when she turned 18 the system did what it always does. It let her go. No preparation. No safety net. No phone number to call when things got hard. Just a plastic bag with her clothes and a pat on the back. She tried to hold it together. Got a part-time job at a gas station. Rented a tiny room above a laundromat. But the money was never enough. The rent went up. The hours got cut. And one morning she woke up to a lock on her door and her bag sitting on the sidewalk. She was 20 years old. Homeless again. But this time there was no system to catch her. No foster home waiting. Just the open sky and cold concrete. For 2 years she survived like that. 2 long years. And then one morning she found herself walking along the coast. She wasn't going anywhere that morning. She was just walking. Putting one foot in front of the other because that was the only thing she knew how to do anymore. The coastline stretched out in front of her. Grey sky. Cold wind. Waves crashing below like they were angry at something. And then she saw it. Sitting on a cliff above the water. A building. Old. Beaten. Forgotten. It looked like it had been fighting the ocean for 100 years and was finally losing. The walls were stained with salt and rust. The windows were hollow. The roof sagged in the middle like a broken spine. A faded sign hung sideways near the entrance. Coastguard station. She stopped walking. She didn't know why. Something about that building held her there. Maybe it was the way it stood alone against the wind. Broken but still standing. She felt like she was looking in a mirror. She asked around the town. An old woman at a shop told her the station had been empty for decades. The council had tried to sell it. Tried to demolish it. But nobody cared enough to do either. It just sat there. Rotting. Waiting. The old woman laughed when she asked how much it would cost. $10, she said. Maybe less. Nobody wants that death trap. Her stomach turned. $10 was everything she had. Every last coin she had scraped together from returning bottles and spare change on sidewalks. If she spent it, she would have absolutely nothing left. Not even enough for a piece of bread. But her feet carried her back to that cliff anyway. Back to that building. Back to that rusted door. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The smell hit her first. Damp. Rot. Salt. Years of neglect packed into every corner. The floor was covered in debris. Broken glass. Old newspapers turned to mush. Something scurried across the room and disappeared into a crack in the wall. Most people would have turned around and never come back. But she didn't. She stood there in the middle of that wreck and did something strange. She smiled. Because for the first time in her life she was standing inside something that belonged to her. It wasn't much. It was barely anything. But it was hers. She paid the $10 that same afternoon. The woman at the shop shook her head and said, "Good luck, sweetheart, you're going to need it." She didn't argue. She just took what was hers and got to work. The first night was brutal. No electricity. No running water. No heat. The wind howled through the gaps in the walls like it was trying to push her out. She curled up in the corner of what used to be the main quarters and barely slept. But when morning came, she got up. She always got up. That was the one thing the system taught her without meaning to. How to survive another day. She started clearing the debris with her bare hands. Room by room. Pile by pile. Her fingers cracked and bled. Her back screamed at her. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Because in the back of her mind she kept thinking about that door. That heavy metal door at the end of the hallway. The signal room. It was waiting for her. And she wasn't ready yet. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And every single day she showed up and worked. No days off. No breaks. No excuses. She had nothing, so she found everything. Old planks washed up on the beach became her walls. Rope and driftwood became her shelves. She pulled nails from rotten boards with her bare fingers and straightened them with a rock. She walked miles to find things people threw away. A half-broken window behind a pub. A piece of sheet metal from a demolished shed. A bucket of paint someone left by a dumpster with just enough left to cover one room. Every single thing she used was something the world had given up on. Just like her. She taught herself everything. She sat in the public library on cold afternoons and watched repair videos on an old computer until the library closed. Then she went back to the station and tried what she had learned. She failed constantly. A patch on the roof that lasted 2 days before the rain came through again. A wall she spent a week fixing that cracked the first cold night. But she kept going. And then one day an old fisherman walked past. He stopped and watched her trying to lift a beam that was twice her weight. He didn't say a word. He just walked over and grabbed the other end. His name was Tom. He came back the next day. And the day after that. He brought tools she had never seen before. He showed her how to use them. He never once asked her why she was doing this. He already knew. But even Tom told her to stay away from that signal room door. Something about the way he said it made her want to open it even more. For months. That's how long it took before she stood in front of that door again. This time she was ready. The rest of the station was coming together. The roof held. The wall stood firm. The main quarters had a floor you could actually walk on without falling through. But that door. That heavy rusted metal door had been haunting her since day one. She told Tom she was going to open it. He went quiet for a long time. Then he nodded and handed her a crowbar. It took them 2 hours. 2 hours of pulling and prying and grinding metal against metal. The rust screamed like it was alive. Like it didn't want to let go of whatever it was protecting. And then it gave way. The door swung open and a wave of cold stale air hit her face. She stepped inside slowly. The room was dark. Tom handed her a flashlight and the beam cut through decades of dust floating in the air like tiny ghosts. And then she saw it. The room was frozen in time. A wooden desk sat in the center. On top of it a Morse code telegraph still in position like someone had just stepped away for a moment. Maritime maps covered the walls. Yellow and curling at the edges. Logbooks were stacked neatly on a shelf. Everything was exactly where it had been left. Untouched. Unseen. For over 80 years. Her hands trembled as she reached for one of the logbooks. She opened it carefully. The pages were brittle and smelled of salt and thyme. And tucked between 2 pages near the back she found something that made her legs give out from under her. It was a diary. Small. Leather-bound. The cover was cracked and faded, but the words inside were still perfectly readable. Written in neat, careful handwriting that slanted slightly to the right. She sat on the cold floor of that signal room and began to read. The diary belonged to a young woman. A signaller stationed at this very Coastguard station during the war. She was 23 years old when she wrote the first entry. Barely a year older than she was now. The words hit her like a freight train. The girl in the diary had been ripped from her family by war. Sent to this cold station on the cliff. Alone. Terrified. She didn't know anyone. She had no one to talk to. No one who cared if she was okay. Every night she sat in this exact room sending signals to ships in the dark. Guiding them through danger. Saving lives she would never see. And every night before midnight she had to burn the secret codes from that day. Then start again with new ones the next morning. Over and over. Alone in this room with nothing but the sound of the ocean and the clicking of the telegraph. But she never stopped. She never quit. Even when she wrote that she wanted to. Even when the pages were wrinkled from what must have been tears. She kept going. One entry near the middle of the diary stopped her cold. She read it 3 times. Then a 4th. The young signaller had written 7 words that felt like they were meant for her. 7 words sitting in this room for 80 years waiting for her to find them. The words were simple. Written in the same neat handwriting as everything else. But they carried a weight that 80 years couldn't weaken. You are still here. That is enough. She read them again. And again. And something inside her broke wide open. Not in a bad way. In the way a dam breaks when it can't hold the water anymore. She pressed the diary against her chest and sobbed. Not quiet tears. Deep heavy sobs that echoed off the walls of that tiny signal room. Because those 7 words answered a question she had been asking her whole life. A question she whispered on park benches. In shelters. On cold nights when she wondered if anyone would even notice if she disappeared. Am I enough? A girl she never met. A girl who sat in this same room 80 years ago. Afraid and alone just like her. Had answered that question without even knowing it. Tom found her sitting on the floor 20 minutes later. Eyes red. Diary still in her hands. He didn't ask what happened. He just sat down beside her on that cold floor and stayed quiet. After a long time she finally spoke. She said a girl lived in this room a long time ago. She was alone too. She was scared too. But she made it. Tom nodded slowly. And so did you, he said. She looked around that signal room. At the telegraph. At the maps. At the logbooks filled with proof that someone survived this same darkness before her. And for the first time in her entire life she believed she was going to be okay. But she wasn't done with this room yet. Not even close. She made a decision that night. The signal room would stay exactly as she found it. Every map. Every logbook. The telegraph. The diary. All of it. She wouldn't touch a thing. This room wasn't hers to change. It belonged to that girl from 80 years ago. It belonged to her story. And now it belonged to every person who needed to hear it. She poured everything she had into the rest of the station. Tom helped her every single day. More people started showing up too. A woman from town brought curtains she had sewn herself. A shopkeeper donated a small stove that still worked. A teenager carried over a box of dishes his grandmother didn't need anymore. Piece by piece the station came alive again. The main quarters became a warm living space with a bed she built from driftwood and a mattress someone donated from a thrift store. The old watch room became a sitting area with a view of the ocean that could make you forget every bad thing that ever happened to you. She planted wildflowers outside along the cliff edge. The same kind she had seen growing in cracks along the coastline. Stubborn flowers that grew where nothing should be able to grow. Just like her. The station that had been rotting for decades now stood proud again. Clean walls. A solid roof. Windows that caught the morning sun and held it like a gift. But she kept thinking about others. The ones still sleeping on benches. The ones still invisible. The ones who needed to sit in that signal room and read those 7 words for themselves. She opened the doors. Not just for herself. For everyone. She turned the Coastguard station into a shelter for young people aging out of the foster care system. The same system that had thrown her away. She took in kids who had nowhere to go. Kids who aged out at 18 with a plastic bag and a prayer. Kids who looked exactly like she did 2 years ago. Lost. Broken. Invisible. She gave them a bed. A warm meal. A roof that didn't leak. But that wasn't the most important thing she gave them. Every single person who walked through that door was taken to the signal room. She would open that heavy metal door and let them step inside. She would hand them the diary and let them read it for themselves. And every single time the same thing happened. They would reach those 7 words. You are still here. That is enough. And they would break. The same way she did. Because those words hit different when you have spent your whole life believing you are not enough. Word spread fast. The local newspaper wrote about her. Then a bigger one picked it up. Then another. People started showing up from all over. Not just foster kids. People who had lost everything. People who were one bad day away from giving up. They all came to that cliff. They all walked into that signal room. And they all left different. Tom watched all of this happen from his usual spot by the door. One afternoon he looked at her and said something she would never forget. That station sent signals to save ships. Now it sends signals to save people. She smiled. Because he was right. But there was still one more thing she had to do. She had to find her. The girl from the diary. The signaller who sat in that room 80 years ago. She had to know what happened to her. Did she survive the war? Did she find peace? Did she ever know that her words would one day save someone else? She spent weeks searching. Asking around town. Visiting libraries. Digging through old records and archives. Most trails led nowhere. Dead ends and faded documents. But she didn't give up. She never gave up. And then one evening she found a name. A real name matched to the signal station records from 1943. Her heart nearly stopped. She followed the name to a small town 40 miles up the coast. And there in a quiet nursing home overlooking the sea she found her. She was 96 years old. Frail. Silver-haired. sitting in a wheelchair by a window that faced the ocean. The same ocean she had watched from that signal room all those decades ago. She walked up to her slowly, sat down beside her, and pulled the diary from her bag. The old woman's eyes went wide. Her hand shook as she reached for it. She opened it and tears rolled down her face before she even turned a page. "You found it," she whispered. "I always wondered if anyone would." They sat together for 3 hours. Two women separated by 80 years but connected by the same cold room on the same cliff above the same ocean. One had sent a signal into the darkness. The other had finally received it. And now it was time to pass that signal on to you.